Last week, we saw high school sports make a triumphant return with Week 0 action on the gridiron. Now, high school basketball players are hoping that their season will begin on time in a few months and is met with the same success. In the meanwhile, a local hoop star decided to end everything recruiting-wise and commit to his top school today before his season even gets underway. Lee High School basketball standout Kaleb Brown had a big decision today. The younger brother of current SEC standout Kaleb Brown have had the likes of Grand Canyon, Mercer, Minnesota, Missouri, West Virginia, and Wisconsin recruiting him. So with his final decision, Kaleb Brown decided to go with his heart and his family and chose the University of Missouri. Once again, Brown will be a teammate of his older brother, Kaleb Brown, in Tigerland. The big difference this time is that Quanzo Morton will be their head coach instead of their dear old dad. Kaleb talked about his decision.
It's great. I've been playing with my brother for the last 2 years, except last year. So it's a good connection on the floor for sure, and it's definitely great to have somebody you know off the court, just in the same state as you. It's not like going away from home or anything, because we're together.
Moving over